I'm hosting our first week of our holiday gift guide, and that includes 6 weeks of deals and giveaways. This week, we're kicking it off in our big way with one of our most loved Sew Steady accessories, which is our 2-arm suspension system. It comes in a cute little box like this, but you're getting 2 big arms like you see right here to be able to add to help you and give you support in your sewing room. That's right, that's buy one, get one deal on the 2-arm suspension system, which equates to 4 arms in your sewing room. This is such an awesome tool for being able to do free motion quilting, ruler work, and everything else that you might want, including mending your dog beds or even embroidery. It's awesome for doing quilting with embroidery. This little clamp that you see right here clips onto your extension table, your counters, your tables. It's got 3 inches of gripping space with rubber grippers to protect whatever you're gripping to. Then you clamp it really easily to your extension table and etc. to be able to secure that arm. Once you do that, you're able to go ahead and clip your project right onto the arm. I like to keep a loop in mind to be able to keep it extra secure. It helps with the weight a little bit, but this is awesome for doing all of the things that I mentioned, including even binding your projects if you're a quilter. So how does it work? Earn bonus giveaways when you sign up, and every time you sign up, you're able to go ahead and enter for each of the week's drawings. Make sure to like, comment, and share for bonus entries, and if you choose to purchase the deal, you get one more bonus entry. Whether you're purchasing from one of our dealers or one of our popular resellers online, take advantage of that opportunity. Every week, we're going to ask you to tune in for our next week's deals, and you're going to find out who won the deal of the week last week. So please join us as we celebrate our 6 weeks of holiday deals and our gift guide, and make sure to tune in for your next week.
Hi everyone, it's Stacy with Sew Steady, and I am super excited to be here with you. We're going to be sharing with you this amazing quilting ruler video with Shanna. Shanna is going to be taking you through doing the ruler quilting on one of our Shadow Dizzy Geese bonus plans. So this is not in the box, but this is one of your alternatives if you wanted to go ahead and stitch out with feather templates. So if you have feather templates at home, this is going to be a great opportunity to get some new ideas on what you can do with your feathers. They do some really fun little things. I kind of feel like they become honestly like little they look like little bird feathers or fingers coming into the design, but I think that they do a really great job in designing. Donna McCauley originally created these designs. These are in your lookbooks inside of your Elevate quilt box if you got it. If you did not get it, we have our Shadow Dizzy Geese lookbook for free on our website. You can check out all of these recommended designs to be able to finish your pinwheel style blocks. So I'm going to let Shanna take it away. She's going to go ahead and teach you how to create these gorgeous feather ruler designs on the practice panel. That practice panel is sold separately. I will post a link to that so you can check that out. And then we may even give one away today because I love to give things away. I did post a link to the weekly deal this week. It's buy one, get one on the suspension system, as you just saw. But if you haven't already signed up for the giveaway this week, I will go ahead and post a link to that too. So you can check that out and learn more about some of the other future giveaways that we've got going on. All right, let me go ahead and have Shanna take it away, and I'll be posting some links here shortly in the chat.
Hi, I'm Shanna Rendon, and today's class is the Shadow Dizzy Geese Block B. There are 2 options for this basic design. One has the look of more traditional feathers, and the second is kind of a swishy looking feather. But both designs are stitched out the same way. The only difference is the direction of the feathers. And even though it's an easy design to stitch, the look of the overall pattern is quite impressive. I continued the patterns out into the borders of my blocks to give you a better look, a better all-over look at the designs, and it was kind of fun to stitch. The pattern uses only 3 templates. The Westerly Design feathers shown here, and we'll be using the 2-inch, 3-inch, and 4-inch feather templates. and we'll be switching out these templates a lot. Let's go to the project. I have the instructions and my templates. My templates are in a ruler rack. I'm using the smaller ruler rack here. It is about 5 inches by 5 inches and 10 slots. The larger is about 7 inches by 8 inches and has 14 slots. You can see my 2 panels here, and I prepared the quilt sandwiches a bit differently than I have before. In that, I used more starch. Previously, I only used Best Press or light starch, but recently found out that I like the look of my stitches a lot better after using a little bit more starch. So it's about a medium weight starch. I soaked the panel and the backing and allowed the fabric to dry. Then after pressing, I marked the panel before adding the backing and batting. It just looks to me like the stitches are more defined. So I recently did a poll at my local ruler classes and had the students vote, and they also favored the more starched samples. So I'm going to try this for a while. And don't you just love the new larger panels? I used my 12.5-inch crosshair and marked 8 lines. 4 of the lines helped me separate the panel into 4 individual blocks. The diagonal lines are then used to make an X in each of my 4 blocks. These X's will help me find where I need to put my feathers. So my fabric reference lines now look like the instructions. I used a friction marker to mark this, but I tested it on my fabric to make sure that I could indeed iron away the lines and the line wouldn't come back. These are a couple of images I borrowed from the instructions and enlarged them almost to life size so that you can better see the differences in the 2 patterns. So briefly, these are the steps to creating the block B designs. First, start on any block and stitch the feathers along all 4 sides. Once the first block is quilted, you must decide which design you want to do next. So if I want to make this design, I can see which direction I need to stitch my next feathers. Or if I want to stitch this design, I can also see which direction I need to stitch my feathers. These images I borrowed from the Shadowed Dizzy Geese Embroidery collection and printed the embroidery design on transparency film so I could see what it was going to look like on my project. I'll be stitching this pattern first, and I've already stitched half of my panel so that you can see how I'm going to put the feathers together. However, let's look at the instructions. So right now I have all 4 blocks marked with a large X. The large X tells me I'm going to keep my individual feather plumes within that triangle. So far, so good. I can start at any edge of my block that I want. And you can see that I'm going to put feathers within the triangle. So imagine the outside edge of the block as the feather spine. And we want to put our largest feather plume in the largest area that we have. So the number 4 feather is going to be at the peak of that triangle. So our step 1 is to stitch in the 4-inch feather. Notice that the stitching line shows a point at the feather spine position. And that point at the feather spine is not reflected here nor here. So looking at the two designs, neither design has a pointed 4-inch feather along the spine. But let's take a look at what that might look like. Both of these examples are from the artwork in the instructions. The example on the left is when you begin stitching at the center and there's that little point along the spine. The sample on the right is a little more evenly spaced, but basically there's not too much difference between the two examples. However, when I tried to do the second example, the more swishy looking feather, the feather on the right looks pretty good to me, but the feather on the left, I just didn't like the way it worked out. I couldn't get this design to work out well. It can be done, but it was more difficult. And we'll be stitching along the spine if we follow the instructions in step 2, because we do our 3-inch feather on one side of our pointed 4-inch feather and then travel to the opposite side of the center feather. So we'd be traveling along the spine. So I will just show you a little bit different method where I can stitch out both designs and they turn out the way I like. I will also include a demonstration of stitching out the design as it shows in the instructions. So let's start with this design. I'll call this design 1 simply because I'm stitching it first. Both of these designs look really more complex than they actually are. I'm only going to be using 3 templates to stitch out half a feather and then stitch that 4 times for each block. This is the half feather that we'll be stitching 4 times for each block to create the designs. We'll be using the 2-inch, 3-inch, and 4-inch basic feather templates. And this shows the placement of my feathers within the block. So I'm going to be referring to the 1/2 inch at the small number 2 feather as the bottom, and the 4-inch finial looking feather, I'm going to call that the top. This is my Shadow Dizzy Geese panel for design 1. I've stitched half of the panel at this point because I wanted you to be able to see how the feathers fit together to make design 1. I've marked my panel by outlining each of the 4 blocks, as well as marking the X through each block that will separate each block into 4 triangles, so that my feathers will remain within their triangle. This is the layout I plan to stitch: 4 half feathers in this unstitched block. If I want to do design 1, I will stitch this block with the half feathers beginning at the same point to form a mirror image. So the bottom will start at almost the same stitch and the finials will match. So as I move around the block, I'll be starting my number 2 feather, or the small feather, next to the finial. This is the 1/2 inch space I'll leave. But you've got the half feather and the finial. Then just work your way around the block, inserting your half feathers. So my suggestion for stitching the panel is to stitch 1 block. Any one of the 4 will do, but have the design in mind that you want to complete. When you go to stitch the next block, you want to do an adjacent block so you can lay out the design to stitch the second block. It'll really help. At the end, I'll show you where my mistakes are because I did not follow my own suggestion. Okay, so these are my templates, and I have them in a ruler rack. This is the small version, 10 slots, and it's about 5 by 5 inches. It really helps to keep my templates organized, especially when I'm going to be switching templates with every individual plume of my half feather. I also have some ruler stickers and some marking on my templates, and let me explain that a little bit. I like to stitch my feathers from the bottom to the top. This line helps me with the 2-inch feather because I put my needle in at that point, stitch all the way around the feather, and I end up with my needle at the same point. This mark is about 1 inch from the bottom, and it's at the point of the 2-inch feather. So with this design, I want to come back to the same stitch. I also put ruler stickers on each of the 3 templates to mark the center line, because I'm going to use that to line it up on the edge of the block every time. I placed my needle 1/2 inch away from the edge of the block, and it's on top of the stitching from the mirrored half feather. I'm lining up the template center line, marked by my ruler sticker here, with the edge of the block. Then I'm going to place my Sharpie marker line even with the needle. So I'm in place, ready to go. Lined up. Okay, let's stitch our first feather. And come back to that point. And I'm going to stitch feathers just the way I usually stitch feathers would be to come back up here. I know that I'm going to be putting a larger feather. Let's trim that. So I'm going to be putting the larger feather, the 3-inch feather, next, and slip that on, line up the center. So knowing I was going to stitch the 3-inch feather next, I left my needle up about that high. But this is something that you can experiment with to get the look of the feathers you like. Same thing now goes for the 3-inch, because I'll be putting the 4-inch feather in. So line up the center, and my template is pulled all the way forward toward me. Look at that. My feather comes right back to match my other feather here. So we're good. I'll line it back up again so that I can backtrack. So that I can backtrack back up my feather. Now, this time I'm going to be using a smaller feather, so I only want to backtrack about the distance that I can see my 3-inch feather over here touching the 4-inch feather. So that's about it. Put my 3-inch feather back on, again lining up the center, and I'll be able to stitch my 3-inch feather, and should be able to join the stitching there. So all is going to plan. Okay. Now another smaller feather, the 2-inch feather. Line up centers, and there we go. Going to be able to touch that feather. And I don't need to backtrack on the last feather because I'm going to use my largest feather, the 4-inch feather, and if I stitched using this side of my using the right side of my feather. I'm now going to use the left side of my feather and put this arrow and measure out, make sure that I'm going to join my stitching right here. So I'm going to make that upper plume the exactly same size. And then I'm going to tack that down with some smaller stitches. Let me show you what that looks like. Okay, so this design works. I now have the direction that my feathers need to go for the rest of my block, which means my next feather will start 1/2 inch away from the edge of the block, and I'll be stitching my 2-inch feather from the bottom to the top again. And I'll start my next feather by just simply doing a jump stitch like they do in embroidery. Just mark my spot where 1/2 inch is and put my needle down there. That's going to just catch my bobbin thread too, and do a couple of tack stitches. And I'm going to now start this side. So top, now I'm going to start at the bottom again. I'm starting with the smallest feather and lining up the center. Yeah, the markings on my block, this feather is maybe touching that marked line, or maybe just a little bit extending beyond that line, but it's okay because we're going to be stitching 1/4 of an inch in from the template. So as long as the center is lined up on the edge of the block, we're good. There's the 2-inch. Oops. Works better when you have the stable tape down. So line up, center, and the back of the ruler is on the back of my ruler foot. Now take the largest feather. Drop it up part way. Now the 3-inch. Two-inch. And then back to the 4-inch. So again, I used this side of the feather. So I'm going to go to this side of the feather and line up this arrow with my corner right here. And my arrow, the ruler sticker, is on the template and located on the 3rd reference line in from the outer edge of the template. And I marked both sides of my feather. Oops. a few small stitches to tack that one on. Do a jump stitch. Measure my 1/2 inch again and mark. So at a 1/2 inch, I'm starting with my 2-inch feather, lining up the corner of the template, or this line that I put on, as well as the center line with the ruler sticker. Foot was caught in a little thread loop. Look again. Line up the center. Just touching the edge of the block. Okay. This is the 4-inch feather, and it's placed exactly as the other two. That is, resting up against the ruler foot, matching up the center line with my ruler stickers. Also, the ruler stickers are different colors on each of the different templates. Thought that might help. And you can see here that my technique variation is indeed placing the 4-inch feather in the upper portion of each triangle. Slide the 3-inch feather on. And the 2-inch. I'll line up the other side of my feather, and using the spacing gauge, I will hit the corner of my block. Some small stitches to tack that down. Placing a mark 1/2 inch in from the edge of the block, and I'll stitch one this direction to see if you can see it better, and finish up the stitching for one complete block. And a couple of small stitches to tack that there, and then I'll do some small stitches as I begin to make the 2-inch feather. Again, my plume is facing inside. Line up the center and make sure that the corner is lined up on both sides. That way the stitching will come right back to the same spot. And I backtrack up the edge. Three-inch feather. And the 4-inch feather. Another thing that I found out while stitching this pattern is, you notice how I can just take my template and slide in the next template. And that works beautifully. But if you happen to notice that you're bumping your ruler foot as you're taking templates on and off, please periodically reach over and make sure your ruler foot's tight. Okay, there's the 4-inch feather. And notice my 4-inch feather tops are all mostly in the center. I didn't need to begin at the center. I could start on one edge and go to the other edge. So here's my 3-inch feather. And 2-inch feather. And the other plume of my largest feather. Put the spacing gauge there, and I'm going to line it up with my arrow. Okay. And here is one block stitched out. Let's take a look. So if this happened to be my very first block, you really have to decide at this point which of these patterns you want to do. You can still do either pattern, and then choose the top and bottom for the next block that will make the pattern that you want to do. If I make a mirror image of this block, I'm going to have the first design. So I'm going to go ahead and do a jump stitch back to here. This is where I started this part of the feather. So I can begin at the same position and stitch out a mirror image feather. And that will make it the design 1. If I stitch my feather at the opposite direction, that would be design 2. Also, once I stitch my mirror image feather, it makes it easy then to see where I need to put my top and bottom feathers within the entire block. So, a couple of locking stitches, and just come down and so to stitch my mirrored feather, start with my 2-inch feather template. I'm lining up using the center line and my baseline that I drew here on the template. Also, my needle is in the same stitching for the other side of the feathers. Two-inch feather, 3-inch feather now. Lining up the center. I'm essentially stitching a spineless feather here, one side at a time, and my stitching is coming right back to the same stitching on the opposite side. A bit too far there. Back to 3. Shoot. Then number 4. And the opposite one, opposite side. And now on this block, I will have 2 tops coming together and the opposite 2 bottom parts coming together. And that means that I'm stitching it okay. So let's move on and stitch the next one. And I can go either direction, but since this one is already stitched out, I'm just gonna go right back to where that needle was placed and start there. Starting with my 2-inch template, lining up the center line and the base line. Line up all my lines. And then add the top. Just pulling the bobbin thread up, and I'm going to trim off all the threads because I've quilted all 4 blocks. Let's take a look. This is what I have so far. The feathers are all within their triangles, and I really like this design, and it's not difficult to stitch out at all. I'll take the marks off and we can look at the finished project. So this is the finished panel with design 1, and I've extended my feathers out into the border just to add some more feathers. And this is what it looks like just looking at the 4 blocks within the panel. So let's go on to design 2, the swishy looking feather. Just finished stitching this design, and it has the top part matching the top part and just matches all the way down the feather. And next we'll be stitching this design. It looks different, and this one's kind of swishy as opposed to matching up, but we do match up some of the feathers here. Okay. Notice these two don't match up to anything, and on the other side they don't match up to anything here. So it's just these feathers that we're going to match. And there's also this kind of interesting design in the center. So this is a really cool design, but I thought it was maybe a little bit more difficult, so I did the other one first. This is design 1. We just did this. But now we'll be stitching this. It's stitched out the same way. We just have to pay attention to which is top and which is bottom. Started here. Since I'm going to connect with the top, I marked my 1/2 inch space, and I'll put my needle down here and start with the bottom. I also switched thread colors just because originally I didn't know which color I wanted to use, so I got one of each, and I'm keeping the pinkish color for the back because it's kind of pinkish, and using sort of a seafoam green that matches the panel's green over here for the top. Okay, so again, 2, 3, and 4 inch feathers. So about the thread, I'm using a 40 weight polyester embroidery thread, both top and in the bobbin. I'm stitching on a Bernina Q16 in manual mode. Starting with the 2-inch feather, and it's 1/2 inch from the center. So this is not a mirror image. So my 2-inch feather is now up against the finial of the opposite feather. The template center is aligned with the edge of the block, and my marked line is lined up with the needle. Okay, so we'll stitch the first feather. There's the 2-inch, and you notice it is not lined up with anything. Now the 3-inch will also not line up with anything on the opposite side. I'm just stopping at the edge of the block. Line up the center line, and look at that. It's gonna match. Okay. Lining up my center line again. Oops. There we go. And there's it. The 4-inch feather. Okay. Oops. I didn't do a great job right there. But there's our swishy looking feathers. Okay. So like the last time, I'm just going to do a jump stitch. So jump stitch to 1/2 inch away from the edge of the block. This technique is really easy, and just have to stitch the same thing and it just works. Let me just pages. Space Engage. Oh, Space Engage is favorite Space Engage, which is like Janet's all-in-one Twitter. Little pattern stitches there. I'm just going to tie it off here. Jump over and stitch out another one that so that you can see how the two sides meet up. So the first 2-inch feather is here, so I'm going to start here. Drop the needle here, my 1/2 inch, pull up the bobbin thread, start with the 2-inch center line, base line. Turn out 3 inches. Okay, the first two do not match, but the 4 should match. Lining up the center. Had to adjust the template slightly here, but it's okay. Let's take a look at one more matching up, because the technique is really quite simple. I chose this one in order just so I can show you how it matches up again. And this is what I have so far. I will finish this up and take the marks off and be right back. This is the second design, and again I've continued that design out into the border. Both designs are very easy to stitch out. Which one do you like better? Up next, I have a very short video, 5 to 7 minutes long, showing how to stitch out the feather as it is in the instructions. Stay tuned. I want to stitch this design as it's stated in the instructions. So I have my block marked with an X. I'll be stitching in one corner area. So they have us start with the number 4-inch feather and just stitch around it one time. So we place the widest part of the feather up here so that it's going to fill in nicely. So stitch the feather, then move along to stitch the 3-inch feather and then the 2-inch feather. You can go either direction, doesn't really matter, but you're going to have to stitch a little bit on the feather spine. So let me show you how that looks. This is my test fabric. So I'm going to take my feather, my 4-inch feather, and in order to stitch it here, I put the center line directly on outside line of my block and position it so that it appears to be kind of in the center. The highest part is toward the center there. So I'm going to pull up my bobbin thread. My bobbin thread is different color from my top thread, so I'm getting a contrast look. Okay, so I have everything lined up. You can't really see everything. Let's turn it like that. So just out and around the template and stop. Let's move it over a little. Okay. Hold down my tails. So here we have one 4-inch feather. And I'm going to stitch going up first. So the easiest way for me to do that is go back on my feather to about here. So that's my 4-inch feather. Here's the 3-inch. Put it on just like the 4-inch. And go back up. Right there. 2-inch feather. Okay. And I'm going to use the 4-inch feather to make the little topper plume. And backtrack. And now I'm going to have to backtrack down the feather spine. And the best way to get started is to then backtrack right up the feather itself to about the point where my previous 3-inch feather was placed. Oops. Put it on the same way. Oops. Yep, that's the 3-inch. And back of the ruler foot, touching the ruler on the center line here. And backtrack so I can put my little 2-inch feather in. And there is one feather plume. Pull my threads. And this is what that feather plume looks like. But and the instructions look very much like my feather, but that feather doesn't look like this. And that feather doesn't look like this. So I'm going to show you a couple of different ways to do the feathers to make them look like this.
Thank you all so much for joining us today. We'll look forward to having you join us again tomorrow for another amazing class. Have a wonderful day.